Okay, welcome back everybody. We're on to week 5. And this week we're going to talk about locks. And it would seem probably strange to some of you to say, we're spending a whole week on just talking about locks. But it's a thing that most security managers don't have a real good grasp on. And if you're ever responsible for building out a new building or building out a new area in a building, which you will be sometime in your career, this is stuff you're going to want to know. So there's a lot of information here, but there's also a lot of good cheat sheets, and we'll go over those. But let's talk a little bit about why this may be important to you. So let me ask you this. Would you put a doorknob with no lock on your house or apartment front door? Probably not. All your stuff would be gone pretty quick. Would you put a lock on your home that required you to go outside to lock it at night? Depending on what neighborhood you live in, you may not want to go outside after dark, even to lock your door from the outside. How about if you have a toddler? And most of you do not, but if you did, would you be okay if they locked you out and then you're outside looking in and they went into the kitchen to play with the knives and the electrical appliances and such? You really have to pick the right lock set for the door, and it has to match the application. And there's a way for you to do that. It's a little more art than science, but let's talk about that. So we're going to use what's called predictive modeling to think about what lock set to use. And it's really nothing more than putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. You have to understand what they're going to use the room for, what's inside the room, how often they're going to access it, what special needs they may have. So understanding the room and area use and what the occupant needs is pretty critical to selecting the right lock. But predictive modeling is not that hard of a concept, really. When I talk about predictive model and predictive modeling, and we'll use this a lot in physical security, it's really more guess than science, but it really involves your personal experiences as well. So in physical security, most people tend to think like criminals, right? How would this person get into my building? How would they breach my security perimeter? How would they do me harm, right? We also need to think like end users. I always use the example of if I put a brick wall all the way around a house, and then cover that brick with ground glass and barbed wire, razor wire, then light it on fire and have no gates going in, I'm pretty confident that I'm going to keep out most intruders. But I'm also pretty confident that I'm going to probably burn when the when the wall reaches the house, and I won't have a way out. So we need to think about end users and criminals when we do a predictive model. And our predictions are based on facts and likely reactions. So again, if you over protect something where people can't get in and out and they need to get in and out to do their jobs, they're going to find a way. So it's almost like if you overprotect, sometimes you create security vulnerabilities from the inside. So we're going to use a predictive model when we talk about locks. And when you start to do your design work, which you're going to kind of start on this week, I want you to think about the use of a room. So here's a hint for you. In the drawing that I supplied, there's a break room. Do we need to lock the break room? If we lock the break room and the first person comes in the morning and really needs a cup of coffee, what's the first thing they're going to try to do? Try to find another way into the break room. Try to mess with the lock, right? Use a credit card to try to slip by the lock set, whatever, when all we're really protecting is the refrigerator and the coffee pot, which really doesn't have a high value. So in my experience, when you have a break room, if you want to lock up the coffee so no one takes it home with them after hours, go ahead and put something on a cabinet, but don't lock the room. And make sure you leave enough coffee out so that when you forget to unlock it the night before or that morning, you don't have somebody breaking in the cabinet, right? So it's really a matter of end user and protection all in one happy package, so that you're protecting something but also making it usable. And that's what you have to predict. So this is especially important when you talk about choosing the right lock. Okay, you have to think like the end user. What are you really trying to accomplish, right? I could put the heaviest duty lock set on every door I have and lock it down tight, and I'd be fine as a security manager, except that people couldn't get in. And perhaps people couldn't get out. So really, each lock set has a different purpose. We're going to go over a number of types of lock sets this week. And I'm giving you a cheat sheet. You're going to see the cheat sheet pop up several times in the lecture because we're going to use it to reference back. I suggest you print that out and you keep it in your book of things to keep when you leave Slippery Rock, right? And then we're going to predict what the end user might want to do to match the lock set to it. And you're going to go through an exercise and a discussion this week to do that. So let's jump right in. The first set is called a passage set, and it is just that. There's no key. You turn the doorknob and it opens the door and you walk in. There's no key, there's no lock. It is just meant for passage. Sometimes you don't even turn the doorknob. Sometimes you just pull it like on a closet door, right? It's just a doorknob to hang on to. You can turn it so you can close the door often, but not always. You use it on closets, small storage closets for office supplies if you don't need to lock them up. There's no real security use for them. They're really kind of a handle, but they're often used as a default in new construction. So when a new building's being built, if you don't specify what types of locks to put on doors, then that construction management firm will almost always put a passage set on because it fills the hole in the door. So when somebody comes through and says, yep, the doors are ready to go, then that's great. But you as the security manager then come in after the fact and have to retrofit every single door with a different lock. Much easier to specify those up front. So the good thing about a passage set is that it's cheap and it's easy, and you'll find lots of them normally in your home, right? Between mostly closets. But you have to be careful that they don't get specified on new construction. So as a security manager, tuck that away in your things to do, right? On new construction, make sure you always inquire about the locks. Otherwise, you're going to have a building full of passage sets, and you're going to take almost every one of them out and use them for other purposes. So here's our cheat sheet, and you're going to see this quite a few times. And right here, the LF2100, that's just a brand model number. It doesn't mean anything to us. It's a passage set. Both levers, always free, right? Turn them, come in, turn it, go out. Nothing can be locked. Nothing can stop you from moving from side to side. Passage set, just as it sounds, gives you passage from one through a door without any interruption or chance of being locked in or out. But we find we may need to lock the door sometimes. So we have privacy lock sets. Now, a privacy set, you're normally going to find that on your home bathroom, home bedrooms, interior doors in a home, with the exception of closets, which are passage sets, are normally a privacy set. And you can always tell a privacy set because on the inside it has either a turn or a button or something you use to lock the door. And on the outside, it's got usually a little hole that you can stick in a very small screwdriver, a coat hanger when you straighten it out, anything, and it will pop that lock from the outside. Again, privacy lock sets are often installed on new construction, and you have to be very careful. Also, if you release a space, the person who put in their locks will take out their locks and normally put in privacy sets or passage sets. They're not always what you want to have in a commercial building, and oftentimes when they put them in, they'll put in home versions of them which will wear out within a year because they're not meant for the constant use of an industrial setting. But you can always tell a privacy set because either on the inside of the knob or next to the knob there will be a button, a rocker, a turn knob of some kind that will allow you to lock the door from the inside, and something on the outside other than a key that allows you to pop it from the outside, usually just a small hole that you have to stick something thin in and pop the lock. And here we have it, the privacy lock set. Here it is the LF2200. Again, these numbers don't mean anything because this is a particular manufacturer, but this is a great cheat sheet. If you notice, outside of the door, inside of the door. This one has a push button or a thumb turn on it. And then on the outside, a narrow tool is used in an emergency to pop the door. You want these in your house, on your bathroom, in your bedroom, especially when you have little children, because oftentimes they will lock themselves in and not know how to get out. So you can pop it from the outside. And you'll want to lock it because oftentimes they will interrupt you at the worst possible moment because they're little kids, and that's what little kids do. Here we go. We're going to step it up a notch. Now we have an office lock set. Now office locks look very much like a privacy set, except on the outside they have a keyway. So instead of the little hole to poke anything in that little hole to pop the lock, you actually need the key that's set for that door. You can leave the outside lever in the lock or unlock position. So you put your key in, your door's locked, you come in the morning to your office, you put your key in and you turn it and it will unlock the door. And the door stays unlocked until you take the key and turn it back, or on the inside, there's another thumb turn or push button. The one thing that you have to remember is that these will be mostly the locks that you see, right? Especially in an office environment, right? But when someone turns that thumb turn on the back or unlocks the door, it stays unlocked until somebody relocks that door. So if you unlock your door in the morning and you work all day and then you leave and close the door behind you, it is not locked. It will stay unlocked until it's relocked with the key. So let's take a look real quick on our cheat sheet at the office lock set. And there, right here, under LF2000, is, they call it an entrance or an office. It's commonly referred to as an office lock set. You'll notice there's a button or a thumb turn or something on the inside to unlock it if you want to leave it unlocked during the day. You can use your key to unlock it. And then at the end of the day, you'll need to use your key to lock it, or sometimes they're set so that you can turn the thumb and lock it and then close the door behind you and it will be locked. One thing about office lock sets is that when you close the door and you want it to be locked, you always need to rattle that handle a little bit to make sure, because if not, you'll need to use your key. And people tend to think they locked their door when they closed it behind them because it was locked when they came in the morning. And they only use their key to get in, and they think it's going to close behind them and be locked. It's not. So the majority of times you have a security officer going around checking office security and checking the locks on office doors to make sure everybody locked their office. You're going to find that someone left these unlocked more than anything else. First off, because there's more of them. But secondly, people don't understand that they normally need to use their key to relock that door before they go home. Now we're going to step it up one more notch on the security ladder, if you will, and talk about a storeroom lock set. A storeroom lock set uses a key to unlock it, but you're not going to find a thumb turn or a rocker or a button or anything on the inside, because you use your key to unlock the door to get in, and the minute you take that key back out again, the door is relocked. So every time you access that door, you need to use a key. You can't disable the lock in any way. You use a storeroom lock, and it sounds like you're using it to store, janitorial supplies or something, but storeroom locks are actually a pretty high security item. Higher value storage, electrical rooms, right? You don't want people going in and, if the power goes out in their office, you don't want them going in an industrial building starting to throw circuit breakers. All kinds of hijinks ensue and computers go off and people get hurt. So you use a storeroom lock set on electrical closets, right? And every commercial building has electrical and plumbing and heating and cooling and all that sort of stuff that's behind closed doors. Mechanical spaces, they're generally known as. But anywhere we're leaving the door unlocked at any time is a bad idea. You can use a storeroom lock set because you always have to use your key to get into the room. Let's take a quick look at a storeroom lock set. So here up in the corner, storeroom lock set. Always need your key to get in. This is always fixed. This right here. You turn your key and you pull the door open. Right? This is a fixed, it doesn't flip up and down like the normal handle would. On the inside, it does flip up and down and you can get out. So you can't get locked into a storeroom lock featured room, but you certainly get locked out anytime the door closes if you don't have the key. So this stays rigid. You use your key, you turn it and push on the door normally, right? And in you go, you turn the key doesn't even stay in. Actually, it's spring loaded, so it comes back to its original position, and you take it out, and that door is still rigid, and it's going to lock as soon as the door closes. But from the inside, you can still get out, and that's for fire egress. Obviously, you don't want to lock somebody into a room. So next up, again, we're taking it up a notch every time, is the classroom lock set. And this is the old style classroom lock set. It's commonly referred to as old style classroom. This, you need a key to lock or unlock from the outside, but you can leave it in the unlocked position. On the inside, there are no controls. So there's always free egress from the inside. If you think about it, in use in a classroom, it's not always used in a classroom. You use classroom locks in other applications in industry. It's just referred to as the classroom old style lock set. You can't get locked in the room. You can always get out, and in a classroom, students can always get out. And on the outside, you lock and unlock the door with your key, and there's no, you need to relock it when you're done. And it's used in places like community corrections. Healthcare facilities generally use these types of things. Common areas for students sometimes. The reason that it's called the old style is, and you'll see in a second, well, first let's take a look at it, and then I'll explain it. So this classroom lock, you use your key to lock and leave it in the lock position, or unlock and leave it in the unlock position, right? Almost sounds too simple, but there's nothing on the inside. This is always able to get out. It's always free. That way nobody gets locked in, say, a classroom, if you're using it for that. But there's a problem with the classroom lock set in today's environment, and that is the active shooter environment. And that's why the classroom security lock set, it's known on this chart as the institutional lock set. I've never really heard it called that before, but I left it in because obviously new terminology, let's go with it. But the classroom security lock set has locks on both sides, key locks on both sides. Now, you lock and unlock it from the outside. When you come in the morning, picture the teacher coming in the morning, unlocking the classroom, right? And normally, you can pull the handle up and down on the inside to get in and out. But if there is an active shooter or some other problem in the building and you go into lockdown, that teacher can lock it from the inside of the room as well. There's a keyhole in the handle on the inside, and you can turn that, and you don't have to step out into the hallway, potentially engage an active shooter, and you can lock it from the inside. Most of them are set actually that you don't even need the actual key. It's any key that's on that key system. So if you think about, I have a key to my office and you have a key to yours. If I happen to be in your office or something and there's a lockdown, I can take my key out of my pocket, put it in the back of your lock if it's a classroom security lock, and it'll still work to lock the door. Only from the inside and only to lock the door, right? And unlock the door, right? But only from the inside. But it's used so that you don't have to go out into a hallway and engage a potential dangerous situation, and you can lock it from the inside. These are installed now in classrooms all over the U.S., certainly since Sandy Hook. The old-style classroom lock, the teacher would have to go open the door, take their key, lock the door, and then close it, and then get the students away from the door. In the new scenario, and even I've seen the pictures from last week that you submitted. Thank you very much. One student had the drop locks that are even installed now where they kick a foot plate and it drops into a bolt in the floor. There are other electronic means, but classroom security lock sets lock from the inside. The teacher does not have to go out to lock the door, and it's all designed for active shooter situations, safe rooms for executives, emergency rooms, those things where you don't want to go into harm's way to lock the door to stay out of harm's way. And there you see the institutional or classroom security lock set. You have the classroom lock set and the classroom security. The classroom security, both sides can be locked down and made to be fixed. And again, any key on the key system for the building normally will fit into this side of the lock so that you have options. If you don't have the right key with you, somebody else unlocks your door for you in the morning, especially in a university setting where the classrooms change. And a security person, police department, building aide, somebody may come and unlock the classrooms. If you have any key, if you have the key to your office with you, you can put it in this side and lock the door. So those types of locks are the ones that always trip people up. And if you don't specify what you want and you don't understand what may happen in the room, is it a classroom where you may want to, lock it from the inside so that people don't have to go out into the hallway? Is it just a passage set where you don't want to put any security on at all because you never want to have that door locked for any reason? Is it an office? Is it, you have to look at what the use of the room is, what's going to be in the room, and what the needs of the end user are to match up those. Now, you start to get into a little bit higher security areas, and you start to install locks that are higher security and some that are electronic and powered. And we start with the deadbolt. Now, everybody's pretty familiar with what a deadbolt is, right? Most of your homes probably have a deadbolt. And on the inside, there's a twist to lock and unlock. On the outside, it usually has a key, but it may not. It may simply be a lock from the inside that you twist. You really should, in an industrial setting, have a key lock on the outside because you can have a master key in case there's a problem inside. Nobody has to bust the door open to get in. But they're used for extra security, or if you're inside a room and you're doing something that's highly sensitive, you may want to have a deadbolt so that nobody uses their regular key to access the regular lock. These are installed above the regular lock handle normally, but you can then kind of keep people out, even those who may have a key to the room. Let's take a look at two different styles of deadbolts. So to the left, we have the standard industrial deadbolt, right? You've got your regular doorknob or door handle underneath it on the door, and then above it you've got a deadbolt lock with a key in it in this one, right? Most of them will have keys. And then on the inside you have a turn. And you can either lock this when you leave at night, so you have extra security, right? This throws a bolt into the door, right? Or from the door, rather, into the jamb. Or you can be in the room and turn this and have extra security for yourself while you're in the room if you're doing something that you don't want anyone that doesn't have this specific key, which is going to be different from the one on the door handle, to get in. Over here it's called a rim deadbolt, and you'll see this on older houses. You may have them on your houses as well. I mean, they're not only used in older houses, but they were pretty standard because they're an aftermarket deadbolt. These you normally have to drill a hole in. In fact, you do have to drill a big 2-inch or a 1.5-inch bore in the door to put the deadbolt through, right? This is on the inside, this is on the outside, and they meet in the middle. There's a big hole. With these, you can put this with screws onto the door frame, or the door jamb, and this onto the door itself, and you turn this knob and turn it back and forth. This one normally does not have a key on the other side. It is simply one you throw from the inside in your home or in a very sensitive office where you're doing something where you don't want to be disturbed. I don't recommend these at all for industrial settings. However, for homes, they are very functional and very useful, and you'll see them a lot in home use. But then you move up to something called a mortise lock. And a mortise lock is used in many commercial buildings, and you'll actually kind of recognize these. I'll show a picture. In fact, I'll show you the picture right now, and then we'll flip back. That is a mortise lock. You'll see this inside the door jamb in most of your classrooms. And it's a big plate. You can always tell from the length of the plate whether you have a mortise or whether you have a cylindrical plain, lock that we talked about, the other types. But mortise locks have a pretty unique thing because they can be set for pretty much any of the functions of the other locks. You can set a mortise lock so that it, only works as a classroom style. You can modify it to put in a cylinder on the inside so it can be used as a classroom security lock. You could even just unlock it and just set it from the works on the inside so that it can be used as a passage set, although it'd be a very expensive passage set. They often have the deadbolt already built into them, but they require a pre-cut door. That unit is probably the one I showed, and I'll show it again. It's probably about 8 inches tall and probably another 6 to 8 inches deep, depending on what you buy. And you have to have your doors pre-cut to accept this. A standard door is not going to normally work with this unless you really want to do a major modification to a door. You'll see them in solid wooden doors a lot. Sometimes in metal doors, but solid wooden doors in commercial buildings. I would imagine if you go around and look at some of the classrooms in Slippery Rock, they have mortise locks on them because the buildings were built to accept them. So let's take one more look at the mortise lock so you can see the inner workings. So here we have the mortise cylinder, and when you turn that cylinder, it may turn the deadbolt, and it has latches, all kinds of latch bolts on it, and you turn the lever, so you put your key in and you turn that, and then you pull the lever and everything retracts and you get in. But it has all of these security features built into it with one key, and there's a lot of mechanicals inside here, but you can set these so that the deadbolt it doesn't work if you don't want it to be. You can put the latches to work or not work. You could actually turn it and have the latches all recessed, and it could be a passage set. But a good commercial mortise lock is probably going to run you in the $800 to $900 range. I don't think that, and you can get a passage set at Home Depot for about $19. I don't think you want to spend that kind of money and then have a pre-cut door that's going to run you another extra $1,000 to have it pre-cut like that because it's a commercial door. But mortise locks are pretty commonly used in commercial buildings. You'll see them a lot. When we talk about locks for our warehouse building, we're not going to use these mortise locks. They're too easy because you could just say put one of these on every room, and then if you do decide to do that, you could say that, but you're going to need to tell me what the functionality needs to be in line with these guys, right? So you're going to need to tell me I've got a mortise lock on the door, but I'm using it as a privacy set or a storeroom set or a classroom set or a classroom security or institutional set. So you can say you're going to use mortise locks. It would be a very expensive way to fit a building. I wouldn't suggest it, but if you want to do that, you certainly can do it. But those are mechanical locks, right? They require a key, or you could have a combination, right? But for the most part, they're mechanical. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the electronic ones or the higher tech ones, if you will. And the first one is an electric strike. An electric strike is kind of hard to describe. So if you don't catch it the first time, stick with us. We'll be talking about them again during the semester. So just, try to picture it if you're not familiar with them. But they're used with an electronic access control system. So a card reader normally, right? Or some kind of biometric reader where you're verifying you are who you are, or you're allowed to go in the door, and then the door opens up. The thing to remember about electric strike is, first off, it is electric, right? It's electrified. So you run a badge on a door and you hear a click and that door opens up. But what's really happening is normally when you turn the key, you're pulling the latch bolt back, right? So you turn the key and that latch bolt comes out of the receiver on the door and it goes back into the door and you pull and you open the door. On an electric strike, there's a little flap on the door frame itself. And when you provide proof that you're allowed in the room, like presenting a card or a biometric or whatever. Again, we're going to be talking about these again, so don't get hung up on it. Instead of the bolt retracting into the door, that little flap on the door releases. There's a solenoid that provides power so that it releases, so that the door frame opens up a little bit, and that's how the door opens. They're not great for wet environments, as you can imagine, because they're open electric. Or dirty locations where they might get mud and things like that in them. There's exposed mechanics in these that you really want to use them in an office environment rather than any wet or dirty environment. Let's take a quick look at an electric strike. Okay, there's a very basic electric strike right there, made by our friends at Von Duprin, if I'm not mistaken. And if you try to turn this handle, it's not going anywhere. It is rigid. And when you present your badge or your face or your eyes or your fingerprints, whatever is required by your electronic system to verify identity, it verifies who you are. And again, we'll study these this semester. And then this flap right here, which is rigid now, it's in the lock position, gets power and it opens up. And when you pull on the door, this doesn't turn, but you'll pull on the door and it'll allow that receiver, right? Allow that latch bolt that's sticking in behind it to just flow right through it. And then when it comes back, it pushes it again and it closes and it latches behind itself. And now if you pulled on it, that little flap is rigid again and it won't let you in. So electric strikes, again, are very common, especially when you have card access systems, which we will study and which we'll use in our warehouse. But again, if you have a wet environment or if you have a dirty environment, you don't want to use these because, as you can see in here, these are moving parts here. If you get water in them, you're going to short them out. If you get a lot of dirt in them, they're going to gum up, and you just want to use these in a common office environment where it's relatively clean. But guess what? Life isn't always clean, right? Sometimes you have to have a dirty environment and an industrial environment, and that's when you normally would use a magnetic lock or a mag lock. So they use a very strong magnet to keep the door closed. The door itself is either, if it's wood, it has a metal plate attached to it. If it is metal and it's magnetic, you just use the door itself. You really don't need a plate, but normally they're installed. It just keeps it from banging loudly. And the door is held together by these big magnets. When you present your card or your face or your fingerprint, whatever it is on this electronic system, and it says you're allowed in, it then cuts the power to the magnet, and you're able to just pull the door open. There's less impact to the door frame. If you remember correctly, when we looked at our electric strike here, I had to cut a big hole in a door frame. If I leased this building, my landlord's going to want me to replace that door frame or repair it in some way before I move out. Now, certainly he's not going to accept that, I'm going to leave an electric strike in, and he's got the power to worry about and the breakdown. So I had to cut into the door frame. With a mag lock, I don't have to cut into the door frame because I'm going to mount it to the door and the frame itself. They really are best for dirty, dusty environments. You'll see them a lot on entry doors, places, especially metal framed or glass framed doors, because you can't drill into them like you can, right, for an electric strike. But I'm not a big fan of them because they have to be by code tied into the fire system, and that the National Fire Protection Code says that you must tie in a magnetic lock with the fire system. And it can't be, send a command to this or to that. It has to be a direct tie-in so that when I pull the fire alarm, those magnets release. They always are going to be what's known as fail-safe. If they fail, if the power is cut, they will open. Now, with an electric strike, you can set them to be fail-safe or fail-secure. If somebody pulls the fire alarm or cuts your power, you can just say, okay, that door is going to remain locked. You can still open it from the inside. But with a mag lock, they always need to be fail-safe instead of fail-secure. So understand that if someone pulls a fire alarm in a building and you're using all magnetic locks, those locks will open up and need to open up by fire code no matter where you are, at least in the U.S., and I've never found any place in the world yet that didn't mimic that. Although I have found people that have installed them wrong. I've never found a fire code that said that they didn't want mag locks to open up when a fire alarm comes in, and it needs to be a direct tie-in. So let's take a quick look at some mag locks. I'm sure you've seen them, and I'm sure you're going to come across them and recognize them now, but let's take a quick look. So there you are. There's a metal door, and there's the magnets right there. Okay, and on here there's two metal plates. You could have, I think these are aluminum doors, so they put these steel plates here, and when the door swings shut, that plate touches these magnets, and they energize, and they normally come in two flavors, although there are more. Normally they're 600-pound or 1,200-pound mag locks, and that's the amount of force it would take, direct force, to pry that door open, which makes them incredibly strong. If you have a 1,200-pound mag lock, it is stronger than most mechanical locks, in fact, most deadbolts. If I put a pry bar inside of a door and pry open the deadbolt, I mean, I can normally, if we work it long enough, you'll get it. With these, you'll break the door frame, the frame around the door itself or the metal part of the door frame, long before you pull these magnets apart if they're energized, especially the 1,200-pound variety. But as you can see, magnets here. This happens to be a motion sensor, okay, on the inside, so that when someone walks up to the door, it automatically releases the magnets so that somebody doesn't go to the door and grab it and ram into it. I've seen that happen when you don't have these. It's kind of fun to watch for a while, but after a while it gets old. But this is a automatic door opener. It's just an infrared sensor that says somebody's coming up, release the magnets, and you can set those so that they come like a curtain down in front of the door. So actually when somebody's hand touches the door, it releases the magnets instantaneously. And then when the door swings shut, after these two fine people leave for the day, the door swings shut and these magnets are set to re-energize on contact. Normally, you can set them up with a time zone, but normally on contact, they will re-energize, and that door now is secured and would take 1,200 pounds of force to open that door. Only a couple more to go, guys, but there's an awful lot of locks, isn't there? And knowing this stuff is going to set you apart from others. So it's something that I really encourage you to understand and to toy around with. And plus, it's easy to practice because everywhere you go, no matter where you are, walking around at home or at school or at work, you're going to be touching locks. And if you start to just use your knowledge to identify what type it is and what function it's set to, then you will become an expert in these types of locks very quickly. You don't need to be a locksmith and be able to program them or cut keys for them or anything like that. You just need to know what they do. So next one up is cipher lock. And a cipher lock just has push buttons that can be mechanical or electronic. And you push a certain code on the door, right? Let's take a quick look and I'll pop that up. This one happens to be a mechanical cipher lock, and you have normally a 4 or 5 digit code. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So if the code is 5511, I go 5511, and that door will unlock. And pretty simple stuff. Cipher locks are used for an extra sense of security, but where you don't want to spend the money or you don't have the ability for one reason or another to run an electronic access control system, you may use a cipher lock. They're good for very small groups, okay? You wouldn't want to use a cipher lock where you've got 200 people going into a room because you lose control. The door might as well be unlocked. If it's an electronic cipher lock, it has a history built into it, and you can go back and see what codes were used and when. It will time, date, stamp, and see what code. And you can set individual codes for people on an electronic one. Mechanical is one code. You don't have to issue keys this way, right? You can just issue codes. But codes get shared. We all have PIN numbers and passwords, and we're not supposed to share them, and we know people do. And when it comes to cipher locks, it's very common to share. You and I are sitting in the lunchroom, and I say, "Oh, I got to get such and such out of that room for you. I can't do it until 3 o'clock." "Oh, well, I'll go get it." "Do you have the access?" "No." "Okay, my code is 1234. "Okay, great." And I go in the room and I get whatever I'm looking for, and now I have your code, and it never goes away. The other thing is that I will tell you that doing audits of security around the world, it is likely about, anecdotally, probably 25 to 30% of the time that I will find the code or a code that will work in that door written down somewhere. It's either on the housing that you see here, right? Somebody wrote it in indelible ink on the inside or underneath, or somewhere around on the wall. Somewhere, there's a fire extinguisher that's on the wall next to the door, and behind the fire extinguisher, a little piece of paper that has the code written on it. People forget their codes if they don't go in these rooms very often. They write them down, they keep them by the door, but I have seen them written right on the wall, right? If you look around enough, you look up high, look over the door, reach around the door frame, good portion of the time you're going to find these codes. I wouldn't recommend cipher locks unless you absolutely need to put one in very quickly, and then you have a plan to put an electronic access control system in instead afterwards. So padlocks, there are various designs of padlocks, and we're all pretty familiar with padlocks, right? We had a padlock, a combination padlock normally on our locker when we were in high school. And we put padlocks on fences in the garage, in the barn, and those things, right? And the standard padlock, if you think about it, when you unlock it, it swings around, right? The shackle is free floating around the housing. So you unlock it and then you twist the bottom and then you unhook the shackle from your latch, right? And you're in the building. A cylinder padlock, which I'm going to show you, is a little different in that it needs to be cut twice. You'll see these on storage units quite a bit. So when you put your key in, this whole thing spins around in here, right? But if you just cut it here, you still have it locked. If you just cut it here, you still have it locked. So you need to cut it in two places to get it off. This one, if you cut it, if this is the free floating side, right, you cut it here, then you just twist it and you can pull the lock off. Here you have to cut it in two places. So a cylindrical lock, padlock, is a little bit better security than one of these. Now, these are normally hardened better. So it's a kind of a wash in that regard. If I hit this hard enough with a sledgehammer, I'm going to take this housing right off of here, right? I mean, I would make a big racket. I'd probably damage the door quite a bit. I mean, I'm going to leave a big mark here and people are going to know what I used. But I could probably break this housing. This is just the sheet metal housing where this is really hardened here. This happens to be a smart lock where you actually use an electronic key to get into it. So it's programmed so that you could go and change the lock. If somebody took a key and didn't return it, you could change the lock and that key wouldn't work. Pretty high tech there. I mean, not real high tech, but certainly very expensive padlock. If you're going to use a padlock, I mean, I don't know why I would use one like that. But this one you have to cut twice. You have to cut it in two places to take this section out. Because if you just cut it here, it's still going to stay in place from here to there. If you just cut it on this side, it's not going to turn and allow you to move it. This one you cut in one place and swing it and you're done. So from a security standpoint, this is a little bit better security than one of these in that regard, only because it takes you twice as long to defeat this lock as it does this one, except for if they have a flimsy housing on them, which this particular example does. They make them better than this, right? Where you'd hit it with a hammer. But for the most part, this is going to take you twice as long to get in as this one. So that's a whole lot of information on locks in a very short amount of time. We're at 37 minutes in. We've talked about 10 at least different types of locks. I want you to use that cheat sheet to do your assignment this week so that you don't need to memorize them just yet, right? You will after you practice for a while, but it'll get to be a game as you go into different places and you grab a door knob. From now on, I challenge you not to start thinking, okay, what type of door is that? Because you will for a while. And I want you to because it's great practice. But door locks are installed understanding the end user's needs and what the lock is supposed to accomplish. You could put the highest tech and the most secure door lock on every room, and as a security manager, you'd be in good shape. Except your users aren't going to like you very much. They're going to leave the doors unlocked because you made it too hard to get in and out, and you really have just defeated what you were trying to accomplish by picking the wrong lock. There's lots of them to choose from, lots of different features to choose from. It's just a matter of matching the lock to its purpose. Task and purpose, as we've talked about before. Mortise locks can be set to different types of uses, right? You don't have to use all the features on them. They're pretty versatile in that regard. They're also extremely expensive, and the door needs to be specially prepared for them. If you're building a new building, a new building on campus, right? A new classroom building, academic building, 2-3 floors, mortise locks will probably be the thing that go in because it's the upfront capital cost, the whole building, right? If you're spending $50 million to build a health sciences building on the Slippery Rock campus, why not put mortise locks in there so you have the versatility with it? If you're going to have a leased building and you're only going to have 10 or 15 offices in it, if you're going into a leased warehouse or a built warehouse like we're having, and we have to watch our budget a little bit, we're going to put the actual type of lock we need in each application because it's much cheaper. Electric strikes are used when you're using electronic security equipment, right? And access control systems, which we're going to be start talking about next week. But remember, electric strikes, not great for wet or dirty locations. If it's going to get wet, if it's going to get dirty, I wouldn't use an electric strike. I have used them on the outsides of buildings, but only when they're covered and really not in harsh weather conditions. They're just not worth the repair on them. So electric strikes, great for use, very reliable, simple to operate, but you have to cut the door frame, and they're not great for wet and dirty locations. But if you have a wet or dirty location, or you just have a location where you have a door frame with glass in it, right? You don't want to cut a strike in, you don't want to cut the frame. A set of double doors, normally they do make electric strikes for double doors are a little complex and kind of weird to operate, you use a mag lock, and that works for wet or dirty locations. Not easily adapted for egress. You have to, have some way to get out. Like that, we saw that infrared sensor. Some people put it in a push button. Sometimes on the crash bar, which is the bar you use to go out an emergency exit, you can put in a switch in there. When you hit the crash bar, it releases the magnets. But you always have to interface with the fire system when you use mag locks, and they must be fail safe. Fail safe means if it fails, everybody's safe. You can get out of the building. Fail secure can be used in certain places, especially low volume offices and things like that, where you store something of high value. It's normally not an occupied room, like in a vault. I have vaults and cages that have controlled drug substances in them. They are fail secure. If a bad guy comes into the building and throws the fire alarm, that isn't going to unlock those locks. Those locks are going to stay locked. But with a mag lock, you're generally going to have to put it in with the fire system. Very important that you don't forget that. Cipher locks have codes, and they get traded, right? Very small user groups with cipher locks. Look for the code written down somewhere close, because it's just so common that happens. And you do have to, if you're going to use them for a prolonged period, and some people do, you put a cipher lock on. That's okay. But you're going to need to know how to change the codes in them, because you're going to need to change them probably every couple of months at the longest. And if somebody leaves the company, you're going to want to go and change that code as well. So there's an upkeep on cipher locks. There's a trade-off there where there's a lot of work with them to keep them up to date. Padlocks are really cheap. Padlocks with keys, the keys get lost a lot. And if you use cylindrical padlocks when possible, it will delay the cutting time. It'll double the cutting time. And if you have the padlock on someplace that may be well lit, like a construction gate or something like that, nobody wants to take twice the time to cut that lock. Very hard to cut those cylindrical locks, because that's a pretty small section of cutting that you have too. Normally hardened steel, you can't get a bolt cutter in there very easily. So I recommend those when you're using padlocks if you can, because they just take longer to defeat. So this week you have some reading, and you've just done the lecture. Thank you very much for your attention. You're going to find and take photos of 3 different lock types. 3 different lock types. Okay, I don't want to see, this is a picture of a passage set, this is another picture of a passage set. Hey, look, here's a third picture of a passage set. We did that with the barriers because the bollards and things that you may have taken pictures of were from, with different uses, right? Some of them were for security purposes, some of them were for safety purposes, so you didn't hit a standpipe. Some of them were just traffic control to guide people down a certain way to get into a building. I saw some really great some pictures this week. But in this case, you're going to find 3 different lock sets. You're going to take a picture, and you're going to describe each in 2 or 3 sentences. Give me the type, tell me where it was used, and whether or not that's the proper type of lock that you would put on that particular inside or outside of the building, depending on what the use was. Or you have the option of just 1 lock set and taking a picture of it, but it's got to be absolutely wrong. And I've had students do this in the past, right? You see a lock set and you say, that should have never been installed on this door. But you're going to need to tell us why it's wrong and what the right one should have been. So you can take 3 pictures and do 2 or 3 sentences, or you could take 1 picture of a wrong application and tell us why it's wrong and what would have been right. That's going to take a little more than 2 or 3 sentences. But you better be sure if it's wrong, because when people do comments, if they say, no, that's what I would have used, then you're going to come up short. So I would try take the 3 different pictures. But if you find one that's really wrong, and I did have a couple students last year before in this course that came up and found the wrong lock, and they were pretty excited about it because it was just obviously the wrong place to put that type of lock. And they posted a photo, and they were correct, so they only had to do 1. So they're really up to you on that. But 3 different lock types, a couple of sentences about what type it is, where it was used, and was it used properly? Is it the right one? Or you just find that one wrong one. Your call on that. If you do find the wrong one, please start your discussion, title your discussion post with the word wrong as the first word, so that everybody knows they can go take a look at that to see if they agree or disagree. You need to respond to 2 classmates on whether you agree with their identified selections. Did they get it right? And if so, was it the right application for that door? These aren't long responses, but they are due on Sunday. Again, this week, the initial pictures are due on Thursday at 11:59 p.m. No late work is going to be submitted unless you get permission before the due time for me going forward at all. Zero tolerance for late work unless you've made prior arrangement. I want you to start looking over the warehouse project files. They're in the D2L shell, and start thinking about, especially on the outside, the barriers and lights that you might put up. The interior lighting you don't have to worry about because it's task lighting, right? That somebody is going to design the lighting on the inside of the building, not for security, but for the work that's being done. And generally in a warehouse, you have bright lights on the inside, right? So people can see what they're doing and not get hurt. But on the outside of the building, start thinking about what types of lights you might use and where you might put them. Think about what barriers you might use. I will issue a new drawing with where those hydrogen tanks that we talked about in the building description are going to go, because you're going to want to put a little protection around those, I'm sure. And then on the inside, start looking at the different rooms and just say, okay, what's this going to be used for? What type of lock might I put on this? That is not due until week after next, or excuse me, next week, right? Week 6. You'll turn in some preliminary drawings on that. However, start thinking about it now, because we're going to start talking access control immediately after this one, after this unit. And so you'll be designing on the side, if you will. You'll be designing in your barriers, your lights, and your locks while we're talking about access control. So while it's fresh in your mind, I would suggest you get a little ahead on this and start to do that design. With that, have a great week. I'll be available all during the week if you need to talk to me. I think everybody knows how to get a hold of me if you need to. Please, again, understand that the rule on late work, you need to check with me first. People get sick, people get, things happen in people's lives, but if you don't find out that thing happened until after the due date, you weren't going to get it done anyway. So you need to contact me beforehand so we can discuss it. With that, have a great week, and I will see you on campus.